Pikmin is such an underrated franchise in my opinion. I absolutely adored the original, and in my opinion, this one's even better. I love the cave system they added, as well as the new Pikmin types, the 2 captain systems, and both of the sprays. Pikmin 2 received critical acclaim back in the day, but I actually see many speak out against this one because it goes against what the original said. This is because they added caves, which kind of ruins the pacing that some would argue. I'm getting ahead of myself, though. Let's talk about the development quickly. The original Pikmin was released in 2001 to very positive reception. However, sales were not that strong. It was by no means an absolute failure, but Nintendo and especially Miyamoto expected more out of it. It ended up selling roughly 1.2 to 1.5 million copies, depending on sources, but apparently Miyamoto was saying that Pikmin will be the next Mario. Now let's put that into perspective a bit. Super Mario Sunshine sold over 6 million units, and Nintendo mentioned that Sunshine missed sales projections. Pikmin was simply expected to come up huge, but it was only a modest success. Miyamoto thought that if they followed it up with a more impressive effort, it would sell better. The original plan was to develop Pikmin 2 in just 1 year. However, this didn't happen, and Pikmin 2 ended up taking closer to 2.5 years, and was released on August 30th, 2004, here in the US. The story starts out simple enough. It takes place where the original left off. Olimar returns home to Hokitate and is greeted by the president of Hokitate Fright and a co-worker named Louie. The president informs Olimar that the company is now bankrupt. The company then proceeds to sell the SS Dolphin. After taking out the ship's cost, the debt was still 1,100,000 Pokos. Olimar is so shocked by this figure that he drops the souvenir that he was saving for his son. The souvenir rolled toward the Hokitate ship, and the Hokitate ship processed the bottle cap and determined that it was worth 100 Pokos. This lowered the overall debt to 1,000,000 Pokos. The president gets surprised by this and orders Olimar to go back to the planet with Louie to recover the rest of the treasures on the planet. Eventually, the debt is paid off and Olimar goes home but realizes that he forgot something. He left Louie behind. The president of Hokitate is disappointed and decides to go back with Olimar to save him. That is it for the story, basically, so let's get into the gameplay. Pikmin 2 is a real-time strategy game where the player can take control up to 2 captains. These captains can command up to 100 Pikmin on the field at once. Combat is also similar to the first one, where you can either throw Pikmin onto the enemy to hurt it, or you can swarm them using the C-stick. Pikmin also have either a leaf, flower, or bud on top of their heads. This determines both their speed on the field and carrying items. Red, yellow, and blue Pikmin make their return with most of their abilities intact. Red Pikmin are immune to fire, blue Pikmin can swim, and yellow Pikmin can be thrown higher. However, yellow Pikmin lose their bomb rock carrying ability and gain electrical immunity. Now, none of this is really new, besides the yellow Pikmin's change, and you'd be forgiven to think that Pikmin 2 was just like the original game, but bigger. However, Nintendo added a couple of wrinkles of gameplay to make it different than the first one. First major thing that Pikmin 2 adds is another captain. Louie joins Olimar this time around, and it makes doing multiple tasks at once easier. You can't necessarily control both the captains at once, but you could, say, take 50 Pikmin with Louie to tear on a wall, and have Olimar take the other 50 Pikmin to kill an enemy. This helps a decent bit with all the running around that Olimar had to do in the first game. Another thing that Pikmin 2 added are the Ultra Spicy and Ultra Bitter sprays. These can be obtained by taking berries to the ship. 10 berries fill up a bottle, and these berries can be found growing on berry trees. The Spicy spray is made up of red berries, and when a spray is used, the Pikmin turn hyper. The leaf, bud, or flower is replaced on the top of their head with a little pink particle effect. The Pikmin attack and move way faster in this mode, and it lasts for roughly 40 seconds. The Ultra Bitter spray is made out of purple berries, and when used, it will turn nearby enemies into stone, which will give the player extra time to attack the enemy. These add a very nice wrinkle to the Pikmin gameplay, and I use both of them regularly. Pikmin 2 also added 3 new Pikmin types. First up are the purple Pikmin. These guys are huge and funny looking with their cute little hairs. They weigh 10 times more than any other Pikmin on pulley systems and on paper bags. They also have 10 times the lifting strength of other Pikmin. The average of Pikmin attack strength is 10, but purple Pikmin can do double damage with each whack. However, when Pikmin are thrown, they will stop in their arc halfway and slam down. This thud will do an insane 50 points of damage with a good chance of stunning an enemy. They're simply OP and should be used for any fight possible. The throwing speed in general is increased from the original Pikmin, and it really compounds with the purple Pikmin's damage. Purple Pikmin also don't get panicked or get blown away over by blown hogs. This other main Pikmin type introduced is the white Pikmin. These Pikmin are small with big red eyes. Their red eyes enable them to see under the surface of the earth, which enables them to dig up treasures that the other Pikmin normally wouldn't see. The white Pikmin are also poisonous and can resist poison fumes. These guys are also very speedy, and they are much faster than the other types. These two Pikmin can only be found via Candy Pop Buds. Each Candy Pop Bud can accept 5 other Pikmin. These Candy Pop Buds, along with a third type of Pikmin, can only be found in caves. Caves are the main feature of Pikmin 2 that differentiated the most from the original and Pikmin 3. In each of the 4 above-ground levels, little openings in the earth can be found. If the player approaches and presses A, the player will be prompted by the hazards that are below. They can jump in the cave with their current Pikmin squad. Caves are made up of somewhat randomly generated sublevels, and they hold the majority of the game's treasures. There are 14 caves, and the longest one goes down to sublevel 15. This means that a majority of the game is done underground. When the player enters a cave, the time in the overworld comes to a screeching halt for reasons. Most sublevels have treasures or enemies. There are also some rest floors which may have candy pop buds or nectar to help Olimar or Louie restore their Pikmin squad. As I mentioned earlier, there is one more type of Pikmin they added to Pikmin 2, and those are named Bulbmen. Pikmin are parasites that take over a body or a host. As the name implies, Bulbmen are little bulborbs that have been affected by the Pikmin parasite. And when a parent Bulbman is defeated, up to 10 baby Bulbmen can join Olimar and Louie's squad. These guys are awesome because they're immune to all hazards, but they can't leave caves. It's a bitter goodbye, but it does make them a good choice to sacrifice in candy pop buds. The last sublevel will usually hold the boss, and instead of having a hole go deeper, it will have a geyser to shoot Olimar and the Pikmin to the surface, but the Bulbman won't jump on the geyser. Caves were praised back in the day for changing up the Pikmin gameplay in an interesting way, and for letting the developers add more bosses without having to create more above-ground areas. Many also thought that the semi-randomly generated sublevels kept them fresh. However, I've run into groups that acclaim the original Pikmin as a masterpiece that literally everyone should play, while calling Pikmin 2 trash that ruins what the original set to accomplish. On a surface level, I actually completely get this argument. It could very well be argued that the caves in Pikmin 2 are just there to lengthen the game and ruin the pacing. The original Pikmin is all about seeing how fast you can grab all of Olimar's ship parts. Pikmin 2 doesn't really have a time limit and urges the player to explore more. I'd also be lying if I said that I think that this approach affected Pikmin 2's above-ground level design. No stage has 11 ship parts like the original Pikmin's The Distant Spring. No treasures above ground are particularly difficult to get either. Most above-ground treasures are just kinda there, nothing like getting the Libra and its predecessor. I personally love when a sequel tries to diversify itself from its predecessor, and that's why I like how Pikmin 2 does this. I like how I have the choice of, do I want a long-winded Pikmin adventure, or just one I want to knock out in just a day. It's also the reason why I adore the fact that Banjo-Tooie decided to go bigger. Pikmin 2 will probably take a good 30 hours on a player's first run, but like the original Pikmin, this can definitely be lowered on playthroughs. It definitely took me around 30 hours on my first few playthroughs, but now it takes me around 12. And I still feel that rush of trying to get a lot done in one day in Pikmin 2. One challenge that I like to try every time I play it is to knock out the Wistful Wild in one game day. It still has that adrenaline rush that the original had. I still need to grab 5 or 6 treasures, manage my Pikmin squad, and reach 3 caves in just one day. It's very doable, and I've done it a couple of times, but my main point is that I still feel that I gotta get everything done today rush that the original Pikmin gave me. Like with my Pikmin 1 video, I want to talk about each stage briefly. The first stage is the Value of Repose. This is basically the game's tutorial stage, but it's an actual full stage this time. During the first 2 days, the player is stuck with a small portion of the stage. This gets expanded after getting blue Pikmin, and it's not a small area like the impact site was. Olimar can use the blue Pikmin to drain the water that prevents other Pikmin from getting around the stage freely. There's a lot to do here, as it's home to 3 caves and it's the snowy themed level. I love how each stage is supposed to represent each of the 4 seasons. Purple Pikmin are introduced here. I personally think this is one of the lesser stages though. Not outright bad, but I remember the other stages more fondly. One reason could be the fact that Pikmin 2 has 2 tutorial days, which on replaythroughs it kind of feels drawn out and annoying. However, the Frontier Cave is pretty strong here. It features 20 Bulbmen that the player can grab, and it has a funny boss on the final sublevel. It's the Emperor's Bulblax, and it literally shits out babies. It's pretty bizarre, but god, that's why I love it. The Subterranean Complex is pretty great too because it has the final floor as a gigantic spider that shoots you with a gun. Man, Pikmin 2 is so weird. Up next is the Awakening Wood. The stage is very solid. The layout of it is actually taken from the Forest of Hope in the original game. The landscape shifted quite a bit, and the Hukatate ship lands at a different spot than the SS Dolphin did. I like this because it's a good callback to the original, but it actually feels pretty different to navigate in it. If you put the maps side by side, it becomes pretty obvious that these are almost the same thing. The stage has a great variety of enemies that are lurking around above ground, such as red bulborbs, dwarf bulborbs, creeping flower guys, cloaking baronets, snagrets. This is the stage where Olimar finds 2 new Pikmin types, those being white Pikmin in the White Flower Garden and blue Pikmin behind Electrical Gate. As with the Force of Hope, I love the stage's music. It feels the most Pikmin to me, whatever that means. The other 3 caves here found are the Snagret Hole, Bulblax Kingdom, and Hole of Beasts. Overall, the caves are just kind of okay here. My favorite is probably the Bulblax Kingdom. This is because we get to see our friend, the Emperor Bulblax again, in all of his nerfed glory. This stage also has an Ultra Spicy Spray and Ultra Bitter Spray berries, meaning that this could be a nice place to farm these helpful sprays. The Glint and Flint Beetles also appear here, which can be used to farm further at Ultra Spicy production. In order to unlock this stage, Olimar needs to bring the first half of the globe to the ship. The Perplexing Pool is the third stage, and it's home to the yellow Pikmin. The stage is supposed to represent the summer season, and as the name states, there's a good amount of water here, so blue Pikmin are very crucial. The stage has the same layout as the Distant Spring in the first game, which also had a lot of water. The caves here are the shower room, Citadel of Spiders, Glutton's kitchen, and, you know the one. Alright, let's just get this done. The fourth cave in the Perplexing Pool is the one and only Submerged Castle. If you've played Pikmin 2, this cave should scare the shit out of you. The cave's boss is the Water Wraith, which is a giant blob that rolls around on stones and crushes Pikmin in its path. The freaky thing about this cave is the fact that the Water Wraith doesn't only appear on the final sub-level. If the player takes longer than 5 minutes on any sub-level, the Water Wraith will drop down and get ready to fuck your shit up. The damn thing can't be defeated without purple Pikmin, so the player is shit out of luck until sub-level 5. On sub-levels 3 and 4, the Water Wraith falling from the sky is still a decently big fear of mine. The cave is also located on the edge of the map and is surrounded by water. This means that only blue Pikmin can enter, but it has every hazard in the game. This means that we get to abuse Bulbmin. This cave has up to 40 Bulbmin that the player can exploit. They're so cute, aren't they? They're basically required to complete this cave, as there's a decent amount of electricity in particular, which is a one-hit kill. At least the Pluckaphone is an awesome upgrade, but it's one of the lowest grossing caves in the game. It only nets the player with, like, what, 690 Pokos or something? When this player does reach sub-level 5, they can breed purple Pikmin and kill the Water Wraith. The creepy music that plays throughout this game will probably keep most players on edge. The other caves here are pretty strong too. Glutton's kitchen has such a fun theme. There are bread bugs everywhere, and most of the treasures are food-based. The boss itself is a giant-ass bread bug. This one is always a delight to replay. Shower room is a cave that has a lot of water in it, which would make sense because it drains a lot of the water in the Perplexing Pool after you break the seal. The boss in here is a cool idea, but falls flat due to how easy it is. It's called the Raging Bloister, and it locks onto whatever the player is currently being. The last cave is a Citadel of Spiders, and it is here where you face off against the beastly, beady Longlegs, who is actually very easy to kill with yellow Pikmin. The music here is pretty nifty as well. The Wistful Wild is the fourth and final stage. It is based on the autumn season and is only unlocked when the player pays off the debt. The stage is a mixture of the impact site and the final trial. The music here is also quite strong and might be my second favorite behind the Awakening Wood. Right off the bat, there is a dumbbell that requires 1,000 Pikmin to carry. I actually love this idea, even though it takes the purple Pikmin about half a day to carry it back. The Gatling Groink is here, and it's a douchebag. It snipes Pikmin from far away. When the Pikmin kill it, it will start to restore health when it's unconscious, and if the player lets the health restore, it will get back up and wreak havoc again. It shares this mechanic with the Bulblax. This stage is host to the best selection of caves in my opinion. The caves are genuinely difficult and throw curveballs at you. The three caves are as follows: the Cavern of Chaos, Hole of Heroes, and Dream Den. Cavern of Chaos is a notch harder than the other standard caves, but it's kind of the most generic of the three here. The most memorable sub-level in this cave has something like 64 Dwarf Bulblax and 2 Gatling Groink. It's a lot of fun to sit back and have the Groink snipe the Dwarf Bulblax. The boss, called the Segmented Cropster, rolls over your poor Pikmin. When it hits a wall, giant boulders fall from the sky. The player must throw Pikmin at its belly. Then there's Holy Heroes, which is basically just a boss rush cave. The player can fight many bosses here, such as the Emperor Bulblax, Snagrits, and a piloted Snagrit, a Raging Bloister, and it all comes down to a fight with the Raging Longlegs, a giant black spider that has a load of health. It's the longest cave in the game, going to 15 sub-levels, and it has 10 Bulbmin in it. Lastly, the Dream Den has 14 sub-levels and throws everything the game has at the player. It finishes with a showdown against the Titan Dweevil, who's capable of using poison, water, electricity, and fire. Once it's defeated, the player can bring back Louie to the ship. If the player gets all the treasures, a cutscene will show Olimar and the President escaping the distant planet. Pikmin 2 has some hiccups like the original. At least for one, the Pikmin AI has definitely been improved. They will no longer randomly leave your party to pluck weeds or hit rocks like they did in the original game. However, this does not mean that it's perfect. Sometimes they get stuck behind walls, and just because of caves in general, this seems to happen way more commonly than in Pikmin 1. The throwing speed has been increased, but it still works similar to Pikmin 1. What I mean by this is when you grab a Pikmin, that Pikmin type will come up front. This is remedied by the fact that you can also use the D-pad to switch Pikmin types. For example, if you grab a yellow and want to use a purple, you can use the D-pad to switch to the purple Pikmin. However, this still is annoying because if you're throwing something at an enemy, say purple Pikmin because they're the best type, and you have to move suddenly, you can go from huge purple Pikmin damage to yellow Pikmin, which fly higher and are the worst type at fighting. So yes, in a way, this is actually more jarring despite the fact Nintendo trying to fix it. And that's the other problem too, is just the Pikmin balance in general. 9 times out of 10, I'm charging into a fight with purple Pikmin, even if they have a hazard. That's just how good they are and how OP that purple Pikmin are. The hazards themselves are also uneven. Electricity kills in one hit, but fire, poison, and water all give the player time to fix their mistake. Poor red Pikmin went from top dog in Pikmin 1 to the worst type in Pikmin 2. A few more things to touch on, the first being the game's mission mode. I prefer this vastly to the original's mission mode, and this is because it drops the player in a cave, but unlike the first game, these caves are specifically designed for mission mode and not just the game's levels. It will start the player with a certain amount of Pikmin and spray. To move on to the next sub-level, the player must find the key on the sub-level and bring it back to the Hokatate ship. Once the key is brought back to the ship, the hole to the next sub-level will emerge. On the last sub-level of a mission challenge, bringing the key back will result in the geyser revealing itself. The Pikmin must attack the geyser to get it open. Also, as a side note, Bulbmen are present in a couple of these, which is always a plus. There are 30 challenge levels available, and when the player completes one, it will be marked with a white flower. If the player can beat it without losing a Pikmin, it will be marked as perfect with a purple flower. If the player can beat all 30 challenges perfectly, they will unlock something great. The player will unlock a video called Louie's Dark Secret, which will entail the information that Louie ate the golden Pikmin carrots. He reports back to the president and lies to him, saying that a ravenous space bunny attacked Louie and ate the stash. This is what sent Hokatate Fright into bankruptcy, so really Louie's behind all this. This is a nice time to mention that the players can check out the game's cutscenes at any moment in the menu, which is nice because these cutscenes looked absolutely amazing back in 2004 and still look pretty great to this day. These are a great treat to have in the game and to have at your disposal at any time. Pikmin 2 has 2 more amazing features above the original. These are the Piklopedia and the Treasure Hoard. In the Piklopedia, the player can look at the creatures in the 4 above-ground levels and throw Pikmin carrots at them. Olimar writes notes about their functions, family groups, etc., while Louie just writes about how to eat them. I love how this gives the 2 characters further personality, especially Louie, because he can come off as kind of a jerk, because again, this is his fault as he threw Hokatate Fright into debt. The Piklopedia makes him much more funny and likable. The Treasure Hoard lets the player look at the items that you collect in detail, and features notes by Olimar and the Hokatate ship. Olimar simply states his thoughts on the item, meanwhile the ship goes through a sales pitch. The ship also splits up the items into series, and it's great reading their thoughts. I spent countless of hours reading all 3 of the characters' entries and having a good laugh at them. The last thing I want to touch on at Pikmin 2 is the fact that there are some treasures that power up Olimar, Louie, and the President, which is awesome. I was a bit disappointed that in the original Pikmin, the whimsical radar is the only ship part that had any additional effect. I always love how RPGs, for example, have always made the player felt like as they move along through the game, they feel stronger and they feel the massive progress that they have made. In Pikmin 2, there are treasures that do a lot. For example, they make Olimar, Louie, and the President immune to fire, electricity, run faster, take less damage, fall asleep to be carried by the Pikmin, make the whistle radius bigger, light up caves, open new areas, open up the challenge mode. There's a lot of power-ups here, but my favorite one is either the Pluckaphone or the Rocket Punch. The Pluckaphone enables Olimar, Louie, or the Prez to simply use their whistle to unearth Pikmin. This is nice, a time saver, because it takes a long time to pluck, say, like 20 Pikmin sprouts. The Rocket Punch makes the player's arms huge when they punch. The animation is so goofy as the arm grows to like 3 or 4 or 5 times its normal size, and it does a lot of damage. This can be really helpful in killing enemies who gobble up Pikmin quickly like Bulbmen. Pikmin 2 is easily in my top 5 games ever. The gameplay is super addicting, very fun, and just weird. The atmosphere is also perfect to this game, and the Pikmin themselves are so cute. The character additions of Louie and President and the Hokatate ship give so much more personality and humor. I personally think it's a great improvement over the original. It adds a lot of humor, charm, and just things to do in general. The mission mode is a lot of fun and adds great value for me this time around. The game still triggers the one more day, or I guess in this case, one more sub-level feel to me. The caves were an amazing way to bring more content and bosses without stressing the developers to add more above-ground levels. It's true that the adrenaline rush of trying to complete everything in one day isn't quite as strong in Pikmin 1. I still feel it, but Pikmin 1 is definitely better in that regard. When you add in the sprays, the second captain, the new Pikmin types, the treasure power-ups, and the Piklopedia and Treasure Hoard, I think we have a masterpiece on our hands. Pikmin 2 would get a strong 7 out of 7 from me.